My fiance's dad said, "We want a premarital agreement to protect our daughter's assets." I signed without reading. They were shocked when we divorced and realized the agreement protected my assets, which were 10 times theirs. So yeah, this is the story about how my ex-wife's family thought they were protecting their precious little princess from a gold digger, and ended up creating the exact legal document that protected my fortune from her. You literally cannot make this stuff up. Let me start from the beginning because the setup here is important. I met Jessica at a charity fundraiser 5 years ago. I was there because my accountant had suggested I needed more tax deductions, and apparently showing up to these things counts. She was there because her family's name was on the building. Different motivations, same room. She was gorgeous, I'm not going to lie. But more than that, she seemed normal, down to earth. We talked for like 2 hours about nothing important. Movies, travel, the weird shrimp appetizers they were serving. She didn't mention her family's money. I didn't mention mine. It was refreshing. We started dating, and for the first 6 months, everything was pretty great. She worked as an interior designer at some boutique firm downtown. I told her I worked in finance, which was technically true. I owned a portfolio management company that I'd built from scratch over the last decade, but I kept it vague. My office was small, my car was nice, but not flashy, and my condo was in a decent neighborhood, but nothing crazy. I'd learned early on that advertising wealth just attracts the wrong kind of attention. Jessica seemed to appreciate the low-key lifestyle. She'd grown up with money, sure, but she acted like she wanted something different, something real, or at least that's what I thought. The problem started when I met her family. Her dad, Richard, was old money. His grandfather had started some manufacturing empire back in the day, and Richard had expanded it into commercial real estate. He was the kind of guy who wore polo shirts that cost more than most people's monthly rent, and somehow made even casual conversations feel like business negotiations. Her mom, Patricia, was one of those women who'd never worked a day in her life, but was somehow exhausted all the time. She spent her days planning galas and judging other people's life choices. Mostly mine. The first dinner at their house was an experience. And by experience, I mean it felt like a job interview I hadn't applied for. Their place was in the suburbs, one of those estates with a circular driveway and more bathrooms than residents. The kind of house that screams, "We have generational wealth and we want you to know it." Richard spent the entire appetizer course grilling me about my background, where I went to school, what my parents did, what my long-term career prospects looked like. Patricia kept making these passive-aggressive comments about how Jessica could do so much better if she just focused on finding someone from their social circle. Jessica just sat there, barely saying anything. That should have been my first red flag, but I was too annoyed to notice. I kept my answers vague but polite. Yes, I went to a state school. No, my parents weren't wealthy. Yes, I had a stable job in finance. No, I didn't come from a family with connections. Richard nodded like he was taking mental notes for later. Patricia looked at me like I was something unpleasant she'd found on the bottom of her shoe. The dinner ended with Richard pulling me aside for a man-to-man conversation in his study. That's never a good sign. He poured himself a scotch, didn't offer me one, and got right to it. "Listen," he said, leaning back in his leather chair like some kind of CEO in a movie. "Jessica is our only daughter. She stands to inherit quite a bit someday. The house, the properties, her trust fund. We need to make sure she's protected." I just looked at him. I knew where this was going. "I'm sure you understand," he continued. "It's not personal. It's just good business. We'd want a premarital agreement in place before any wedding. Standard stuff. Just protects what she's bringing into the marriage." I almost laughed. Almost. Instead, I just nodded. "Sure," I said. "Makes sense." He looked surprised. I think he expected me to argue or get defensive. But here's the thing. I'd been planning to suggest a prenup myself. Not because I thought Jessica was after my money, but because I'd worked too hard building my wealth to risk losing half of it in a divorce. Statistics don't lie, and 50% of marriages end badly. But I wasn't about to tell Richard any of that. Let him think he was the smart one in the room. Jessica and I got engaged 3 months later. I proposed at the beach. Nothing fancy, just the two of us. She cried, said yes, and immediately started planning the wedding. Her mother took over approximately 30 seconds later. The wedding planning was a nightmare. Patricia had opinions about everything. The venue, the flowers, the guest list, the menu. Jessica mostly went along with whatever her mom suggested. I stayed out of it. Pick your battles and all that. Then came the prenup conversation. Richard invited me to lunch at his country club. That's where rich people go to discuss things they don't want to discuss at home. It was just the two of us, sitting in the dining room surrounded by other wealthy dudes having the same types of conversations. He pulled out this thick folder and slid it across the table. "The premarital agreement," he said, like he was doing me a favor. "My lawyers drew it up. It's straightforward. Essentially, what's hers stays hers. What's yours stays yours. In the event of a divorce, you each walk away with what you brought to the marriage." I picked up the folder. It was heavy. Had to be at least 50 pages. "My lawyer should probably look this over," I said. Richard waved his hand dismissively. "It's standard. Nothing unusual. But sure, have your guy take a look. We'd like to get this signed before the wedding, obviously." I took the folder home and did exactly what you're probably expecting. I called my lawyer. Not some random family law attorney, but the guy who handled all my business contracts. The expensive one. The one who could find loopholes in a glass of water. His name was Alan, and he was worth every penny of his ridiculous hourly rate. "Read through this," I told him, dropping the folder on his desk. "My future father-in-law wants me to sign it." Alan spent 3 days going through that prenup. When he called me back into his office, he had this look on his face. The look he gets when he's found something interesting. "So," he said, leaning back in his chair, "this is quite a document. That bad?" "Not for you," he said. "The language is actually incredibly broad. They were so focused on protecting her assets that they created a prenup that protects whoever has more money. It's not weighted toward her at all. It just says that in the event of divorce, all premarital assets and any assets acquired through inheritance, gifts, or separate investments during the marriage remain with the original owner." I started paying attention. "It also," he continued, flipping through pages, "includes provisions that any appreciation of separate property remains separate. And get this, there's no sunset clause. Most prenups expire after a certain number of years, or become less enforceable. This one doesn't. It's ironclad and permanent. So if I have more assets than her," I said slowly, "this protects me, not her." "Exactly," Alan said. "The language is so broad and so one-sided toward protecting premarital wealth that it would absolutely protect your assets. All of them. They basically created a legal document that would prevent her from touching anything you owned before the marriage or acquired separately during it." I sat there for a minute, processing. "They have no idea how much I'm worth, do they?" I asked. Alan smiled. "I'm guessing not. Here's the thing nobody knew. Not Jessica, not her family. Nobody except Alan and my accountant. I was wealthy. Not rich, not comfortable. Wealthy. 10 years ago, I'd taken a massive risk on a startup company that nobody believed in. I'd invested everything I had at the time. $200,000 that I'd saved working 80-hour weeks at an investment firm. Everyone told me I was insane. The company was developing some new software for financial services that most people thought was unnecessary. That software is now industry standard. The company went public 4 years ago. My initial investment was now worth approximately $40 million. I'd sold off some shares here and there, diversified into real estate and other investments, but I kept most of it. My total net worth was sitting right around $53 million. I lived modestly on purpose. Nice condo, but not excessive. Good car, but nothing flashy. I didn't talk about money. I didn't show off. I'd seen too many wealthy people become targets. So I kept quiet, invested smart, and lived below my means. Jessica's family, meanwhile, was worth maybe $5 million. Maybe. The house was expensive, sure, but it was mortgaged. The commercial real estate Richard owned was tied up in loans and partnerships. Patricia's lifestyle was funded mostly by debt and the illusion of wealth. They looked rich. They acted rich. But they weren't actually that rich. And they just handed me a prenup that would protect my $53 million fortune from their daughter. "So, what do you want to do?" Alan asked. I thought about it for maybe 10 seconds. "I sign it," I said. "As is." Alan raised an eyebrow. "You sure?" "They want to protect their assets," I said. "This will protect mine. Seems fair." He made a few minor adjustments, tiny things that made the language even more favorable to me without changing the overall structure. Nothing Richard's lawyers would notice. Then we sent it back with my signature. Richard called me 2 days later, sounding pleased. "Got your signature," he said. "Glad we could handle this like adults. No hard feelings." "None at all," I said, and I meant it. The wedding was exactly as excessive as you'd expect. Patricia had invited 300 people, most of whom I'd never met. The venue was some historic mansion that cost more to rent for one night than most people's annual salary. The flowers alone could have funded a small car. I showed up, said my vows, and married Jessica. She looked beautiful. Her family looked satisfied. I looked calm. We honeymooned in Europe for 2 weeks. It was nice. When we got back, we moved into a new place together. Bigger than my old condo, but I bought it outright with cash from one of my investment accounts. Jessica assumed we'd gotten a mortgage like normal people. I didn't correct her. The first year of marriage was fine. Not great, not terrible, just fine. Jessica worked her interior design job. I ran my company. We had dinner together most nights, went out on weekends, did all the normal couple stuff. But there were signs, little things. Jessica started spending more time with her parents. Every Sunday dinner at their place became mandatory. Her mother's opinions started showing up in Jessica's decisions. What we should buy for the house, where we should vacation, who we should socialize with. She also started making comments about my work. When are you going to move up? She'd ask. Get a better position? I'd explain that I liked what I did, that I was doing well, but she'd just look disappointed. My dad could probably help you, she'd say. He knows people. I'd smile and change the subject. The real problem started around year 2. Jessica began comparing our lifestyle to her friends' lifestyles. Why didn't we have a bigger house? Why didn't we take more expensive vacations? Why wasn't I driving a luxury car? I kept explaining that we were comfortable, that we didn't need more, but it wasn't enough. She wanted the life she'd grown up with. The shows, the status, the stuff. Her parents didn't help. Patricia constantly made comments about how Jessica had married down. Richard would corner me at family gatherings and suggest I let him introduce me to people who could help my career. I started spending more time at my office, not because I needed to, but because it was easier than listening to Jessica's complaints about our perfectly nice life. Then I noticed something else. Jessica was hiding spending. New clothes would appear in her closet with tags removed. Expensive purses would show up that she claimed were gifts from friends. Her credit card bills were getting out of control. When I asked about it, she got defensive. It's my money, she'd say. I work hard. She made maybe $60,000 a year. Her credit cards were maxed at $30,000. The math wasn't mathing. I checked our joint account. She'd been pulling money out regularly. Small amounts that she probably thought I wouldn't notice. A few hundred here, 1,000 there. It added up to about $15,000 over 6 months. When I confronted her about it, we had our first real fight. You're being controlling, she said. Just like my mother warned me about. That was Rich. Her mother, who'd never earned $1 in her life, was warning Jessica about financial control. I'm not being controlling, I said, staying calm. I'm asking why you're spending money we don't have on things we don't need. We have plenty of money, she shot back. You're just cheap. I wasn't cheap. I was smart. There's a difference. The fighting got worse over the next few months. Jessica wanted a bigger house. I said no. She wanted a new car. I said no. She wanted to quit her job and start her own design firm with zero business plan and funding from our joint account. I absolutely said no to that one. That's when her parents got involved again. Richard called me up and suggested we meet for lunch. I knew it wasn't going to be pleasant, but I went anyway. He didn't waste time with small talk. Jessica tells me you're having financial disagreements, he said. We have different views on spending, I replied. She feels controlled, he said. Patricia and I are concerned. I just looked at him. The irony of this man lecturing me about control while he'd been controlling his daughter's life for 30 years was not lost on me. Jessica is an adult, I said. She can make her own choices. But I'm not funding a lifestyle we can't afford. Richard leaned forward. Can't afford or won't afford? Both, I said simply. He didn't like that answer. He started going on about how Jessica deserved better, how she was used to a certain standard, how I was holding her back. I let him talk. When he finished, I just nodded and left. That night, Jessica told me she wanted a divorce. We were sitting in the living room. She'd been cold and distant for weeks. I kind of saw it coming. I'm not happy, she said. I haven't been happy for a while. Okay, I said. She looked surprised. I think she expected me to beg or argue or try to fix things. I didn't. That's it? She asked. Just okay? If you want a divorce, we'll get a divorce, I said. I'm not going to force you to stay in a marriage you don't want to be in. She stared at me for a long moment, then nodded. I'll call a lawyer tomorrow. Sure, I said. I'll do the same. I called Alan that night. She wants a divorce, I told him. Ah, he said. Well, you've got that prenup. I do indeed, I said. Want me to handle it? Absolutely. Alan sent Jessica's lawyer the prenup within 24 hours. That's when things got interesting. Jessica called me 3 days later, furious. Your lawyer sent over the prenup, she said. That's standard procedure, I replied. It says I don't get anything, she said. It says you get what you brought to the marriage and anything that's separately yours, I corrected. That's what we both agreed to. My dad's lawyer said this would protect me, she said, her voice rising. It protects whoever has separate assets, I said calmly. There was a long silence on the phone. How much do you have? She asked quietly. Enough, I said. She hung up. The next call I got was from Richard. He was not calm. What kind of game are you playing? He demanded. No game, I said. Just following the prenup your lawyers wrote. That prenup was meant to protect Jessica, he said. That prenup protects premarital and separate assets, I said. It does exactly what it was designed to do. You lied to us, he said. You told us you worked in finance. I do work in finance, I said. I own a portfolio management company. That's finance. You never told us you had money, he said. You never asked, I replied. You assumed I didn't. That's different. I could practically hear him turning red through the phone. We'll fight this, he said. Our lawyers will tear that prenup apart. Good luck with that, I said. It's ironclad. Your lawyers made sure of it. He hung up on me. Alan called me an hour later laughing. I just got off the phone with Jessica's attorney, he said. He's furious. Apparently the family just realized what the prenup actually says. What did he want? He wanted to negotiate, said the prenup is unfair, that Jessica deserves half of the marital assets. What did you tell him? I told him that's exactly what she's getting. Half of nothing. All your assets are premarital or separately maintained. There are no marital assets to split. And he threatened to take it to court. I told him to go ahead. That prenup is airtight. Over the next few weeks, it became clear just how airtight it was. Jessica's lawyers tried everything. They argued the prenup was signed under duress. Alan pointed out that I'd had my own lawyer review it and had taken several days to consider it. They argued I'd hidden assets. Alan pointed out that nobody had asked about my assets, and I'd never lied about them. They argued the prenup was unconscionable. Alan pointed out that it was exactly what Richard's lawyers had written, and that it protected both parties equally. The judge agreed with Alan on every point. The prenup stood. Jessica was entitled to exactly what she'd brought to the marriage. Her car, her personal belongings, and about $12,000 in her personal savings account. That's it. She got nothing from the house, nothing from my investments, nothing from my company, nothing from anything. The marriage had lasted 3 years. She walked away with less than she'd had when we started. The final divorce hearing was quick. Jessica looked miserable. Her parents looked furious. I looked calm. When the judge finalized everything, Richard tried to corner me in the hallway. You planned this, he said. This whole thing was a setup. No, I said. This whole thing was your setup. I just signed the papers you gave me. You knew what you were doing, he said. I knew what I was signing, I corrected. So did you. You wanted to protect assets. That's what the prenup does. It just happens to be my assets it's protecting, not yours. Patricia was crying in the background, going on about how I'd deceived them, how I'd taken advantage of their daughter. Jessica just stood there, looking stunned. I don't think she'd fully processed that she was leaving the marriage with almost nothing. I tried to make this work, I said to her, ignoring her parents. You decided it wasn't enough. You wanted the divorce. These are the consequences of that decision. I didn't know, she said quietly. You didn't ask, I replied. You assumed, just like your parents assumed. You all saw what you wanted to see and made decisions based on those assumptions. That's not my fault. I left them in that courthouse hallway and walked out to my car. Alan was waiting for me in the parking lot. Feel good? He asked. Feel satisfied, I said. There's a difference. The aftermath was messy in the best way possible. Jessica had to move back in with her parents within a week. The car she'd been driving was in my name, so I had it picked up from their driveway. She called me crying about it, said she needed it for work. I reminded her that Uber exists and hung up. The house we'd lived in, I sold it 2 months later. Made a decent profit since the market had gone up. Jessica found out through Facebook when the new owners posted pictures. She sent me a long message about how that was our home, and I was being cruel. I didn't respond. Her parents tried to save face by spreading rumors. Told everyone at their country club that I'd hidden assets and tricked them. But here's the thing about wealthy social circles. Lawyers talk. Within a month, everyone knew the real story. That Richard's own lawyers had written a prenup so ironclad that it had protected the wrong person's fortune. Richard got destroyed at the club. I heard from a mutual business contact that people were actually laughing about it. The great Richard Hammond, real estate mogul, had been outsmarted by the son-in-law he'd looked down on. He stopped going to the club for almost 6 months. 2 months after the divorce, Richard's company hit financial trouble. Turns out several of his commercial properties were underwater on their mortgages. He'd been leveraging debt to maintain the lifestyle, and when the market shifted, he got caught. He had to sell their vacation home in the Hamptons. Patricia was devastated. Jessica posted some passive-aggressive thing on social media about family struggles, and I laughed. Jessica herself had to go back to her interior design job full-time. But here's where it gets good. Her boss found out about the divorce through the gossip mill. Apparently, Jessica had been telling everyone at work that she was married to a wealthy finance guy and would probably quit soon to start her own firm. When the truth came out, her boss was less than sympathetic about the situation. Jessica ended up quitting anyway because she couldn't handle the embarrassment. She tried to start her own design business, but without capital and without connections that wanted to work with her after the divorce drama, it failed within 4 months. Last I heard, she was working as a sales associate at a high-end furniture store, making commission. The same girl who'd complained about me not spending enough was now working retail to make rent. Patricia tried to reach out to me once, about 6 months after the divorce. She called my office. My assistant told her I wasn't available. She called back 3 more times. I never took the call. Eventually, she gave up. But the best part came about 8 months after the divorce was finalized. Richard needed a business loan. His company was struggling, and he needed capital to avoid selling off more properties at a loss. He went to several banks, got rejected by most of them because his debt-to-asset ratio was terrible. Then he came to me. Well, not directly to me. He had an intermediary reach out, someone who knew I had capital to invest. They didn't tell him who the potential investor was until he'd already agreed to the meeting. I'll never forget the look on his face when he walked into that conference room and saw me sitting at the head of the table. He went pale, actually took a step backward. "You've got to be kidding me," he said. "Business is business," I replied. "Have a seat." He sat. We went through his proposal. It was actually decent, just poorly timed with market conditions. He needed $3 million to restructure his debt and fund a new development project. The terms he was offering were fair. I listened to the whole pitch. Let him finish. Then I stood up. "I'm going to pass," I said. "Why?" he asked, and I could hear the desperation. "Because you're a bad investment," I said. "You make decisions based on ego instead of data. You assume you're the smartest person in the room, and you treat people like they're beneath you right up until you need something from them. That's not someone I want to do business with." He just sat there. I walked out. He ended up getting the loan from somewhere else, but at terrible terms. Heard he's basically working to pay interest now. The family money that he'd been so desperate to protect from me was getting eaten alive by debt payments and bad investments. Meanwhile, my company had a record year. I expanded into 2 new markets, hired 15 new people, and increased my personal net worth to about $62 million. I bought a place downtown, actually nice this time, penthouse with a view. The kind of place Richard probably assumed he'd always be able to afford, but now never would. I ran into Jessica once, about a year after the divorce. I was at a restaurant with a date, and Jessica was there with some friends. She saw me, and I watched her try to decide whether to come over or not. She came over. "Hey," she said, looking at my date. "Can we talk for a second?" "No," I said simply. "Please," she said. "I just want to apologize." "For what?" I asked. "For the divorce you wanted? For spending money we didn't have? For listening to your parents instead of trying to make the marriage work? Which part are you apologizing for?" She didn't have an answer. "That's what I thought," I said. "Have a good night, Jessica." She walked away. My date asked what that was about. I said it was nothing important, and it wasn't. The real justice came about 18 months after the divorce. Patricia's sister was getting remarried, and apparently there was drama about it in their family. The guy she was marrying was wealthy, legitimately wealthy, and he'd insisted on a prenup. Patricia was telling everyone at a family gathering that prenups were evil and that her sister shouldn't sign it. Jessica apparently lost it. In front of the entire family, she went off about how their prenup had cost her everything, how Richard's lawyers had screwed up, and how they'd all assumed wrong about me. She told them exactly how much I was worth, how the prenup had protected me instead of her, and how she'd walked away with basically nothing. The family stopped speaking to Richard and Patricia for months after that, blamed them for ruining Jessica's financial future with their arrogance. Christmas that year was apparently very awkward. Alan called me when he heard about it through the legal gossip network. He was laughing so hard he could barely talk. "Richard's own family is turning on him over your prenup," he said. "Good," I said. That prenup, by the way, became famous in certain legal circles. Alan uses it as his template now. He's told me that at least 20 of his clients have used variations of it for their own marriages. Every time someone signs one, I get a little satisfaction knowing that Richard's lawyers created something that's now protecting other people's fortunes. If you enjoyed this video, please hit that subscribe button. It really helps the channel and help us bring you more and better stories. Thanks. Stories. Thanks. Stories. Thanks. Stories.